32 lands is completely reasonable in a Magic the Gathering Commander deck. Let's talk about it. So in many videos, and especially in my most recent video, there have been a lot of comments about my land count in some of my decks. Sometimes I'll showcase a deck and the land count will be quite low, sometimes even as low as 32. And I almost always get at least 1 to 2 comments on those videos saying that 32 is not nearly enough lands for any commander deck. And I'm here to tell you that that is just not the case. And before you go off and say that I'm just trying to be contrarian, I'm just trying to be different, or I'm engage baiting or rage baiting or doing any sort of baiting, I'm not. And in this video, we're not just going to go over my last video that I posted and that deck specifically. We're also just going to go over the concept of land count and mana count in general in the game of Commander. The first thing that I truly want to highlight is different schools of thoughts. It's simple as that. For most decks, I am of the school of thought of how many mana sources, how many things in my deck can actually create mana, and how much is actually required for each particular deck. Sometimes I just want to play on curve, so I make sure that I have 38 lands because in most cases with 38 lands, you're going to be hitting your land drops consistently. And then I only add a couple of mana rocks or mana dorks into those decks. Then there are other times where I'm playing a more greedy strategy that wants to accelerate a bit faster, so I go down to 32 lands and I decide to add a lot more mana rocks and mana dorks so I have a faster bit of acceleration. Now you might think, how is 32 lands faster than 38 lands? And it's as simple as you only get 1 land drop per turn, but you are not limited as to how many mana rocks you can play per turn. CEDH, Bracket 4, and Bracket 5 have already kind of figured this all out. Now, you're not normally going to be playing Mox Opal and Chrome Mox and Mox Diamond and Mox Amber and all these free mana rocks and 1 mana rocks in your casual commander decks. However, when you're only limited to 1 land drop per turn, these mana rocks are incredibly efficient and very, very good for you. Not only that, you can get into the more expensive mana rocks as well, and it's pretty fine for your deck because you are accelerating at a much faster rate than any other casual deck that's just hitting their land drops normally would. You can even take Ral Monsoon Mage as an example. Ral, in most cases, in their most optimal CEDH deck, runs 13 lands. If this deck isn't proof that land count really doesn't mean anything, I don't know what is. Then you can see some decks that I've made that are more geared towards CEDH that still have 46 mana sources split between lands and mana rocks, and the amount of lands in there are around 28 lands. The deck in my last video had 32 lands, but there have been plenty of decks that I've made that have 38 lands. Each of these is in different schools of thoughts, different approaches to the game. They all think about different bracket levels. They all think about different ways of how they actually want to accelerate, how much they want to accelerate. And that's the biggest issue that I have when people just give a default land count minimum to every single commander deck they own. You hear a lot of creators out there kind of put commander in some sort of bubble. They have an expectation of everyone just plays casually. I don't even care about winning. I don't care about having an effective deck. But if I do have an effective deck, my form of effectiveness is different than your form of effectiveness. In a lot of ways, what just makes me so mad is that they're always like, well, 38 lands is perfect because you're almost guaranteed to hit your mana rocks. But there are people that don't play like that. I could hit my land drops all day of the week. That's totally fine. And I do have decks that have 38 lands in it because that's all I want to do. I want to play on curve. And so if I'm not wasting time ramping and just hitting my land drops, I'm doing a better job because that's what that deck wants to do. But other decks want to and need to accelerate faster than that. And when you have to accelerate faster than that, you need ramp. You don't need lands, you need ramp. So having some sort of rule of thumb of 38 lands no matter what is kind of bad, because then what happens is you keep a land of 3 hands and all you do is top deck lands sometimes. Or you go to 32 and you keep a hand with 2 lands and you never hit your lands ever. That is another aspect of lands and land count that needs to be considered. Mulligans exist in Magic the Gathering. You don't have to keep a 0 land hand, a 1 land hand, a 2 land hand. You can go, even with a 32 land source deck, you can go and find a 3 land hand. Usually in casual, most people don't even care. You don't have to go down to 6, 5, 4, 3, or 2. But even if you do, in most cases, if you take 3 hands having to go down to 6, in most cases you're finding 3 lands and a mana rock. This is where my school of thought really comes in. I don't care about land count. I don't care about how many mana rocks you have. What I care about is how many sources of mana do you have in the deck. As per my last video, a lot of people talked about the fact I only had 32 lands, but failed to recognize the fact that I have 50 total mana sources. I have 32 normal lands, I have 2 MDFCs, and I have 16 ways to produce mana in the form of mana rocks, a land tax, and a smothering tithe. Because of that, I have 50 total ways of creating mana, and since it's mostly in the form of rocks, I can accelerate to an extremely fast level. And since I'm accelerating so fast, it's very often that I'm able to cast my commander on turn 3 or 4, rather than on turn 5, which a 38 land deck might want to do more of. Then when I'm able to cast my commander so early, I'm easily able to follow up with synergy pieces that go perfectly with it, and immediately start drawing into any land drops that I have potentially missed for whatever reason. Because of this, the deck that I previously made, the Council of 4, that likes to make deals, likes to do its thing, and specifically beat Timmy players, is perfectly fine with 32 lands, because the only goal for this deck is to outrace these Timmy players and get to the point where they're not swinging at me, but they're swinging at somebody else. If I can ramp just as fast as any Dino deck or any Dragon deck, I will be in a good spot. But if all I'm doing is just sitting there hitting land drops, I'm going to get out aggroed in the game, and I'm going to get to the point where I'm tapping out on turn 5 for my commander, and I'm dying the next turn because of how much firepower these Dino decks and Dragon decks can put out. So if my goal is to outrace them and at least keep up with them, the amount of mana rocks versus lands is perfectly fine with me. You can talk about statistics and that 32 lands is not nearly enough, but in reality, it works totally fine, and I've never had an issue with any of it. Keep in mind that I'm also saying that 32 lands and 16 mana sources, or 50 total mana sources on top of that, is not a one-size-fits-all. That is simply for that deck. That deck wants to race the Timmy player to get to the point where I can pillow fort. Not every deck wants to do that. Some decks, all you do want to hit is your land drops, and you want to really focus more on your economy early game. So less ramp and maybe a lot more card draw. Maybe you want to go for Esper turn 1, Archivist turn 2, and then a Takajia's Welcome on turn 3, or a Caretaker's Talent, and then turn 4 you cast your commander. If that's the kind of deck you're trying to build, land drops make a lot more sense. But when that's not the deck I'm trying to build, I don't need my land drops. I need to accelerate as fast as possible. And how do I do that? I do that with mana rocks, because I can play as many mana rocks as I want every single turn. So what's the entire point of this video? Obviously, this is a bit shorter of a video, and if you've gotten this far, I want to thank you for your patience, and I want to thank you for even giving this kind of video some consideration. The point of this video is just like any other template video or deck building advice video I've ever given, and that is the fact that nothing is one size fits all. And when you hear creators talk about 38 lands minimum or 40 lands minimum, or I do 35 with 3 MDFCs, any of these templates, any of these black and white kind of cookie cutter advice, it's not 100% correct for everybody. Each deck is different. Each deck wants to do something different. I had people in my comments last video talking about my Council of 4 deck and the fact that they run a deck like that and they run 38 lands in their deck. That's totally fine. And I'm not saying that's incorrect, but my Council of 4 deck does not run 38 lands. And that's just a bit different. Content creators might have these rules of thumbs that you might want to follow, and that's perfectly fine. But content creators typically play at their own pods with their own little tiny ecosystems that they follow. Those rules might work perfectly for them and not perfectly for you. And I know for a fact they don't work perfectly for me. So when you're watching their videos and you're watching my videos, just understand that all we're doing is giving our 2 cents, and that having a rule of thumb of 38 lands or 35 or 32 or even 28 lands with 20 mana rocks or only 16 mana rocks or any of these kind of arbitrary numbers that you want to set for yourself, it doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, if the deck works, the deck works. In all of the games and testing and actual playing of the Council of 4, it has worked perfectly and exactly how it was intended to work every single time without fail. And it might be different for you. Maybe you need to take this deck and you need to give it 38 lands instead of 32. And that might work better for you. I think this video has gone a little bit long-winded at this point, so I'm going to wrap things up just by saying again, stay out of bubbles, stay out of cookie cutter advice, and 32 lands is perfectly fine for any commander deck. Just make sure you have some mana rocks and some ramp to go along with it, please. With that being said, you can check out the now budget version of the Council of Four in the description below, and you'll actually see in this list we have a little bit more lands. The reason why is because the spell payoffs that we're looking for don't exist anymore because they are too high of mana or too high of price. Because again, each deck is 100% different and each deck requires different things. So thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all next time.